Mueller's investigation suggests that Russia and other foreign countries have been meddling in this country for some time. So it raises an obvious question, which has been dismissed in the media, but it's a real one. What about the last administration? They knew about this. Why didn't they do anything about it? And where was the FBI? Piers Morgan is the host of Good Morning Britain. He's editor-at-large for DailyMail.com, and we're happy to have him join us tonight. So, Piers, you're obviously looking at this from a foreign vantage, and you think of the FBI as this kind of storied law enforcement organization that always gets its man. Have you revised your take on the FBI over the last year?
Well, I've revised it certainly in the last week, which I think has been one of the worst ever weeks for the FBI in its 109-year history, Tuck, and I'll tell you why. 2 reasons. One, take the Russia investigation. Donald Trump is President of the United States now and has been for just over a year. But there remains 0 evidence that says that he colluded with anyone from Russia in any attempt to fix a U.S. election. That's just a fact. Now, Mueller may have some secret evidence, but he hasn't produced it. So right now, there is no evidence linking Trump to any collusion. So that then prompts the question, well, OK, but we now know there was Russian meddling in the U.S. election. We don't know quite the scale of it. It may be, as Britt just said, reasonably small and not that significant. But there was meddling, and you would expect that. But whose job was it to deal with that meddling, to stop it happening? Well, that would be the previous president, Barack Obama, who from 2014, when the meddling started, it was his job. It was on his watch. And he's got 17 intelligence agencies led by the FBI, and it is their responsibility, in my view, to investigate and to stop and to close down the kind of meddling that we saw from these Russians. And that simply did not happen. And so I would say that if you combine that performance by the FBI in terms of the Russian investigation or lack of it that was going on, and then you look at what happened with the mass shooting this week in Florida, where this is one of the most spectacular ball drops that I've ever seen from any intelligence agency.
Yes.
The FBI were warned twice. Once that this guy had apparently posted on a vlogger's commentary that he was going to be a school shooter. He has a very unusual name, this shooter, Nicholas Cruz, with Nicholas spelt in a very unusual name. The FBI were not able to trace him. And yet he had a background check to purchase the AR-15 with which he committed his crime. They could have found him in 5 minutes. Cut forward 4 months to the start of January, and then we have a most extraordinary situation where it turns out somebody very close to Cruz, the shooter, phoned the FBI tip line specifically designed for tips about crime and potential crime, and said, this guy is dangerous, he's heavily armed, we think he may be planning to shoot up a school. They gave them chapter and verse on this bloke. And the FBI didn't even refer it to its head office in Miami. It didn't even pursue this, despite now having 2 warnings that this guy might be armed, dangerous, unstable, mentally ill, and preparing to shoot a school up. Now, you put those 2 things together, Tucker, and I'm sorry, this is a pretty appalling performance by the FBI, leading me to conclude in my column today that you'd be better off calling them the Federal Bureau of Incompetence.
Well, and you would add to that, and of course everything you said is factually true, and I think your interpretation is right. You add to that the Las Vegas shooting, which the biggest in American history, these months later, we have no understanding of why that happened, and there's a trail of incompetent decisions by law enforcement. So here's my question. Given all of that, I think your position is a reasonable one. Why is it that people who say that are denounced as unpatriotic by media figures in this country? Why is it unpatriotic to question federal agencies?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think that the partisan nature of American politics is now so extreme, and it's on both sides to a large degree, but certainly the anti-Trump hysteria in particular means that people are not able to see the wood for the trees. I come from another country. I look at this with a pretty clear, open mind. You know, I wrote 36 columns about Donald Trump for the Daily Mail last year. 18 of them were supportive, 18 were critical. I'm a reasonably impartial voice in this debate. And I would simply say to all those who don't want any criticism of Barack Obama for what happened with the Russian meddling, or for the FBI with the meddling or now the investigation of this shooter, take a good long look at yourselves. Because if this has happened with Donald Trump, let's reverse it. Let's say that, you know, Donald Trump had been the president when all this meddling was actually going on, and we knew it was going on, there would be absolute outrage that he hadn't stopped it.
Yes.
And so I think it's perfectly legitimate to look at Barack Obama and say, where were you when this meddling was happening on your watch? And the answer is that he and the FBI seemed far more exercised to be investigating other technology in terms of emails and Hillary Clinton and servers and so on, quite legitimately. But were they basically taking their eye off the ball and not focusing on what is probably, for the American country, far more serious, which is persistent Russian meddling through new technology, through American companies like Facebook, Twitter, Google, and others, using and abusing them to try and influence and corrupt voting patterns and voting thinking?
You can't argue simultaneously that that was a big deal and Obama is blameless for not investigating. I agree with that. Piers Morgan, thank you. Good to see you tonight.
Thanks, Duncan.